Alrighty, everybody. Well, it looks like we're good to get started today. I hope you guys have been having a wonderful week so far, and it's almost the weekend, so we're almost there to just have a nice, relaxing end to our week. I would like to go ahead and kick off our webinar this week just by starting off with the logistics for today. If you have any questions and you'd like to submit them anonymously, please use Slido. You should see it pop up on the right side of your screen, or you can also send your questions directly to Morgan Daniels. She sent a little ping in our chat earlier just so you know her name. So welcome to our last undergrad webinar, our summer business analyst interview overview. Our applications closed this past Sunday, so this webinar is really just to give you guys some tips and tricks to really prepare for your interviews if you are invited. So speaking today, I will start off. It is going to be me. My name is Jen. I am a part of our campus recruiting team, and I am based in New York. And I will pass it off to Maggie to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maggie. I'm a manager in our leadership change and organization practice, and looks like I misidentified myself as belonging to Chicago, which is where I'm from, and not New York, which is where I am now. I'll pass it over to Evan.
Thanks, Maggie. I actually am from Chicago. I'm in our CMT practice, an associate. I've been with the firm for 3 years, and I was a summer business analyst in 2019. Jen?
Awesome. So just to go over our agenda for today's webinar, we will kick off by going over our entire interview process overview. There, Maggie will kind of speak to the first part of our interviews, and then Evan will take it over to kind of walk through a case a little bit, not exactly step by step, but kind of like at a higher level, and then Q&A will be at the end of all the content. So please, you're welcome to submit your questions throughout the webinar, but they will be answered at the end.
Hi. So our interview process, we're really testing for two categories of skills. At the bottom, we're showing this little house. At the base is technical skills. This is your analytical ability. This is your structured thinking. It's a really important skill set if you're going to succeed as a consultant. At the top of the house, we have interpersonal skills. This is emotional intelligence. Consulting is a team sport, and the folks who have the most success are able to balance their technical skills and their interpersonal skills, not only because we have to work together, but also because we work with clients every day. And so we need to also engage them strategically and help them sometimes cope with really difficult problems. So as we're trying to assess those skills, we use sort of 3 different levers, and each one is testing both of them at the same time, but to different degrees. So we've got behavioral interviews, we have case interviews, and then the third column is interactions and experiences. And you can think of this as, your resume, for example, and where you're from and where you've worked in the past. I think we can go to the next page and talk more about what the behavioral interview is. So you'll submit your resume, so that sort of answers that one pillar. And then over the course of the 2 rounds of interviews, you'll have 5 separate chunks of interviews. In the first round, you'll have a 45-minute behavioral interview and a 45-minute case interview. In the second round, we have 2 case interviews, but we still have that behavioral interview, and often this is with a partner. So again, in each one of these sessions, we are looking for all 3 of those pillars, just to a different degree. I think we go to the next page. Yeah. So Evan will talk to the case interview in detail later on. I'll speak to what exactly is a behavioral interview. And it's really you telling stories about your past behavior and your past performance. And we do that because we have the premise that your past behavior is the best indicator we have for your future behavior and your future performance. We're looking for, action-oriented folks who drive impact. And so we're going to ask you about how you've done that in your past. The goal is to get an information on, what you can do and what you will do, and learn about how you react in a variety of situations, because consulting can be pretty difficult and clients can throw a lot at us. When you're thinking about preparing for your behavioral interview, we recommend using the SAO framework. And this is a way to structure your responses. So we'll ask you a question, and the way that you should think about structuring your response is to start with, what is the scenario? I'll say something like, tell me about a time that, and you need to tell me first, what is the situation you are facing? What is the task at hand? The A is the next component, and it's the most important. What are the actions that you took and why? And then what were the implications? Who did you interact with? We'll spend some detail in terms of, what actions, what happened. This is a bit of a story. But the final and most important piece too, I think I said that both the action and outcome are most important, so we'll just call them equally important, is what is the result? Again, we're looking for folks who take action and drive impact. And so when you tell that story, you should wrap it up with, what was the result of the action? How did it go? This could be good or bad, but we should tie what we've done to what the implications were. The behavioral questions fall into 3 kind of buckets. The first one is sort of an introduction. Tell me about yourself, walk me through your resume. You can give your elevator spiel here. Start with your name, your school, your education, and then walk us through just some highlights. I think we say here's some internships or some leadership opportunities, but you could even, reference some clubs or other passions. I think this is a space where you can sort of distinguish yourself. It's always helpful for you to tie, as you're walking through who you are, what is bringing you to our door? Why are you interested in consulting? Why are you interested in Kearney? And then I think it says here, no need to ramble. We don't need the whole life story. It can be pretty fast, but what are the key experiences that brought you to our door and why are you here? The second bucket is past experiences. So this could be something like, tell me about a time where you failed or where you worked with a difficult teammate, or what achievement are you most proud of? Again, this might, you can take some time. You don't have to answer right away. Take some time to think through, what is the situation? What were the actions you took? And then what were the outcomes, both quantitative and qualitative? And then the third bucket is just, at Kearney, we value boldness, we value curiosity, we value being distinct, and we call ourselves Kearney Originals. Who are you? What's your personality? How do you prioritize your schedule, or who is somebody you admire and why? We're really just trying to get to know you. I think have fun with these kinds of questions. But again, to the best of your ability, answer in that structured situation, actions, outcome. Oh, you know what? I had one more point, actually, if you'll go back. Because you can see a note at the bottom of 2 past experiences. It says, prepare stories, but don't write them, recite them. I recommend thinking through a couple of the things that you think drove the most impact, a couple of good times where you really demonstrated success, and a couple of times where you maybe didn't, faced some hardship, and try to think through how you could use those examples to answer a couple of different kinds of behavioral questions. And I would recommend that you practice answering a couple of good stories and try to leverage those then in your interview. Although occasionally you might be asked a question where you have to answer off the cuff, which is fine, because then you can just, again, step back and take that SAO approach. Okay, now I can go forward. The case interview is meant to test your analytical capabilities, your technical skills, your quantitative reasoning, your structured thinking. It's really important because, it's not an abstract exercise. We're not asking you to perform this just like a bar you need to jump over. This is how we solve problems and work together. So we're really testing, are you going to like the kind of job? Consulting is problem solving. It calls for thinking quickly on your feet. How are you going to take an ambiguous problem and create a structured approach? Can you operate in ambiguity? Oftentimes it's really unclear as a consultant what you need to do next. Where are you going to take action? And then how can you pull data together so that you can make a case for what you're going to recommend or know what to do next, right? You can use numbers to get an answer about where you should pursue further, or you can say, nope, this isn't, it's not a tree we need to go down. The final point is, as I said earlier, consulting is a team sport, and you should be very communicative and I would say interactive as you tackle the case. Your interviewer is sort of a partner with you there, and so you should, speak speak in that way and make sure that you're communicating clearly. Sometimes we have to walk clients through the work we've done and how we've done it. So again, this is really on the job practice, and we're just testing to see how you'll like that kind of thinking and interacting. Okay, I think I hand it over to Evan to walk us through a sample case.
All right. So for the next few minutes, what we're going to do is we're going to walk through a case and uh, essentially just going to go through each step of the case and what the approach is, what we look for, best practices, so on. So Jen, if you want to go to the next page. Before we even jump into the case, just a few things when you're getting started. First is you want to be able to get really structured on how you're setting up the case. And that is everything from drawing out your framework to writing out your math to taking notes during the prompt. So you should have a really clear way of organizing the information you're receiving and all of your thoughts and approach throughout. Uh, I think one of the most important things with casing is just repetition and comfort and getting the requisite amount of practice in, because it can be nerve-wracking. It's not always easy, and so the more practice you have, not just solving the problem, but running through it from end to end is really useful. So with that being said, Jen, do you want to jump to the next page and we can get into this case on Electronic Vehicle Dealer Co. So if we go to the next, I'm going to basically approach this like I am both the caser and interviewee. I'll be talking to myself for a bit, but reminder, please drop your questions into the chat and the team will monitor them and, can try to answer them live if they're applicable to a particular part of the case, or we'll come back to them at the end. So our client, EV Dealer Co., is an electronic vehicle manufacturer and dealer. It owns the car sales process from design to sales and has grown its market share 10 consecutive years to reach 5% of the North American market. However, due to a variety of macroeconomic and internal drivers, EV Dealer Co. is facing declining profitability. So very typical case structure of profitability. Today, 90% of EV Dealer Co.'s parts are sourced from China, though their entire manufacturing supply chain is based in the US. They sell 85% of their cars through physical dealerships. The remaining 15% are sold either through a digital or customer service channel. EV Dealer Co. is a mission-driven company trying to make the global transportation network cleaner, and they are concerned about their profitability, the viability of the business to do this. They've hired our consulting firm to explain the situation and provide recommendations to get the company back on track towards profitability. The two critical questions facing EV Dealer Co. are: what is the main driver of their poor profitability, and what are the steps that the company could take to address these issues to get back on track? So, if you have all of that information thrown onto you and you're not taking good notes and writing it down, it's going to be really hard to follow along. So the best practice is listen. Evan's talking, you listen, you're writing down your notes, and then it's done. Play it back. Make sure that you got the key points. Okay, we're working with an EV dealer. So obviously they're a challenger in the auto market. They've been growing, but now they're facing declining profitability. In terms of their supply chain, they source 90% of their parts from China, but they actually manufacture everything in the US. They sell mostly through physical dealerships, and then the remaining are sold through other channels like digital or customer service. And they're trying to understand their profitability and how to get back on track. At that point, then you might ask clarifying questions. I'm not going to go into that level of detail now, but you could ask other questions about their dealership footprint or anything like that. And then I see the question on Kearney cases being interviewee or interviewer led. Our cases are typically interviewee led. So what that means is that, you get the prompt from the interviewer and then you're driving the case. Now the interviewer is there to help you, guide you. I always like to say, like, you're working together to solve the case. Like if I'm giving you a case and you're not engaging with me, one, it's really hard for me to follow your thinking, and two, you're going to put yourself at a disadvantage because you don't have any of the information. I have the information. So, yeah, Jen, you're good. You timed it actually perfectly. So now, how do we approach it? So, we've gotten this information. We need to start solving the problem. This is where you build your framework, right? So you would say, I might say, I'm going to take a second to gather my thoughts. And then, 60 to 90 seconds, don't take like 5 minutes to try out your framework, but 60 to 90 seconds and structure the problem. So, right away, and Jen, if you want to go to the next page, we can just jump into the framework here. One more. So right away, I know this is a profitability question, and not all of the cases will have a framework that is this straightforward, but there are generally common ways to structure depending on the type of case that you get. Now, with that being said, if it's something that's not profitability, then we aren't looking for you to just repeat back a framework that you found online or in a casebook. Like, we want to see creativity and different ways to solve the problem. So with profit, you need to split into revenue and cost. There's really no other way to do it. You might have another bucket, like an other bucket that has qualitative factors outside of your profit structure, but that's going to be your base point. So start with profit, and then Jen, do you want to split it? Okay, so we have revenue and cost. So that's a good starting point. But it doesn't tell me all that much about solving the problem. I need to find levers that go into revenue and go into cost. Now, pretty straightforward. It's how many units you're selling on both sides, and then how much does the unit cost, and what are you selling it for? And so then a quick question I see from the chat. Will we have the text in front of us during an interview as shown? No, it will be given to you verbally in almost all cases. So that's going to be the case. You might be presented with information in a chart and you'll get that, but you wouldn't get like the case prompt from beginning to end. Okay, Jen, let's keep going. So what do I need to do now to finish my framework? So I know it's profit, revenue, and cost. I know the equation to factor into revenue and cost. Costs can also be broken down into variable and fixed costs. So your fixed costs are costs that are sort of outside of the product making process. So like your salaried labor, your rent and lease costs for your facility, anything that exists without you making an individual unit. Variable cost is I'm making one vehicle. These are the parts that go into that vehicle. This is the labor that is directly used on this one vehicle. This is the sales commission tied to the vehicle, so on, so on, so on. So that's the last split. Now, before I move on, one quick call out. Sorry, Jen. Your case needs to be MECE, and so when we say MECE, we say mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. That means that everything in your framework, if you go down to the farthest branches, need to cover all possible solutions of the case. So in this case, like all the different financial areas, and there shouldn't be any overlap, right? So we're looking at variable costs, we're looking at fixed costs, we're looking at number of units we're selling, so on. So that's what MECE means. All right, now Jen, we can go forward. Okay, so you present your framework, and then you might say, I want to explore. Do we have any data on the financials for EV Dealer Co? I'd like to explore costs first, and then your interviewer would say something like, actually, we have margin data, and so you'd get this margin data, and so let's look at it. What does it say? It's calculating gross margin based on the unit margin. So unit margin times units sold is gross margin. I'm working from bottom to top. And then how is that unit margin calculated? It's the sale price, the average sale price minus the cost of goods sold. Awesome. We have 2019 here. We don't have 2020 and 2021. So that means we need to calculate the unit margin and gross margin for 2020 and 2021. And so we can talk quant tricks, but I'm just going to kind of breeze through the quant now, and we can come back to it after. So Jen, if you want to go to the next page, run through your calculations, get this data, Awesome. So now we know what the unit margin is and the gross margin each year. So if I'm looking at this data now, I can see the unit margin is declining pretty substantially. And right away, I can tell COGS has increased significantly, almost by a third. And at the same time, unit price has increased a bit, but not a whole lot. And especially this 2020 to 2021, I guess 2021 is this year in this case, it has definitely not increased. So I also noticed a significant increase in units sold. 2020 was probably low due to COVID. So we've seen a spike in units sold, but we've also seen a spike in COGS. So all these observations, conversing back and forth, sharing this with the interviewer. Jen, do you want to go ahead then to the next page? So, might say, let's dig into costs a little bit more since I saw that those COGS were going up. So then we get this cost of goods sold data. And again, you're talking through your observations, right? Like you're reacting in real time, you're working with your interviewer. Raw materials, flat. No change in raw materials, no issue there. Logistics costs, there's an issue there. They've doubled, more than doubled since 2019. That's a problem. Direct labor is increased, but that's probably not all that out of line with inflation. And then whatever this other bucket is decreasing. And you might even ask what's included in other, and in this case, you'd be told it's irrelevant. But what you can see is almost all of the increase is driven through logistics costs. And so, this is something. So, when I was interviewing, I may not have even known what logistics costs were, to be honest. So you might ask, like, what goes into logistics? Logistics is basically like moving your product or raw materials from one place to another. And so, there's different forms of logistics. There's ocean logistics, which is like big ships transporting via water. There's air logistics. There's also ground logistics, which could be train or trucks. Wouldn't expect you to have that level of depth of knowledge for the interview, but it obviously would be important going forward. So, if you see a term you don't know, please ask. Also, this is a good time to pause and stop. If you get stuck during the case, please ask. It is interviewee led, but if you just try to spin yourself out of an issue, you may not finish the case, and that is much worse than asking for help and then getting through the case. It happens. Sometimes cases are tricky, or sometimes there's something you don't understand. So in terms of all this financial information, you need to ask for it. At some point I would give it to you, but ideally, like, you present your framework and then you ask for the financial information. And so, do we have financial statements? Do we have cost data? So on. All right, Jen, we can go into the next layer. Okay. So this is, what are we looking at now? So, probably want to go deeper in terms of logistics costs. So we have this materials cost index, and there's some new information here. Now we're looking at geographic splits. So this is why it's important to be really organized. If you go back to your notes from the prompt, you remember that we source almost all of our raw materials from China. And so what this is showing me is how much does it cost to buy something from China and how much does it cost to get it to the United States? And we can see that the materials are cheaper in China, but those logistics costs are exploding. Versus if we look at some of these other areas, so Australia and Brazil, it might cost more to buy the parts and the materials, but it's much cheaper to get it to the US. Brazil is much more proximate. Australia, there's less demand for shipping, so the shipping costs less to get it from an Australian port to a US port versus China. So maybe we should explore sourcing from somewhere else and looking at the total cost of those materials, fully loaded cost, we'd say, which includes the logistics cost of getting it onshore to the US to our facility. So Jen, if you could go forward. So digging in then to the costs, direct labor doesn't change, other doesn't change. The only thing that's changing is raw materials and logistics costs. So now we can actually calculate the difference between the sourcing from the three different countries in terms of what the fully loaded cost of goods sold are for the vehicle. Again, I'll come back to quant, so we can skip this. And now we can see China is actually more expensive than Australia and Brazil. And so, this is, it makes sense why this was a problem for the client. They saw the raw materials cost was lower, and they weren't factoring in this exploding logistics costs. And so, we see Australia and Brazil are both actually better options. So another pause. It's important as you're doing your calculations to speak about your calculations, so that the interviewer can step in and help you if you make a mistake. It's also important when you finish a calculation to say, this is what this number means. So the 39,500 number for Australia means it costs $39,500 to produce an electric vehicle if I source the parts from Australia, which is $3,000 per vehicle cheaper than if I'm sourcing the parts for China, due to the higher logistics costs, more than offsetting the difference in raw materials. So those types of pauses, observations, so on, really important as you're working through the case. Jen, if you could go to the next page, please. All right. So we know the difference in cost of goods sold. It doesn't make a difference in terms of revenue where we're selling from. So what we can do is we can say, what is the difference in margin if we source from these different places? And so what you would do here to get to unit margin is calculate the unit price, what you're selling it for, minus the cost of goods sold, and then your gross margin is the unit sold times that. And gross margin is almost irrelevant here because you get all of the answer from unit margin anyways, and you can see the significant difference that Australia and Brazil make. If I was going through this case in real time, I'd probably try to quickly or roughly calculate a percentage difference in revenue that would be an increase, in margin. There would be an increase if you switch to Australia or Brazil. So now we've gotten through the math. There's a decent amount of quant in this case. So again, you'd pause and you'd explain, what do these numbers actually mean? What are the big takeaways? And then at this point, you might say, is there anything else that we want to discuss before we do our conclusion? And so we've looked at costs. In this case, the next thing is, let's just do some brainstorming on how to address revenue and fixed costs. Sometimes you'll do really detailed problem solving that has a quant layer and whatnot. Sometimes you'll just work together and bounce some ideas off of each other. And what we're looking for here is one, creativity, and two, it's like quick fire problem solving. It's one thing to like draw out all your calculations and be able to structure a financial problem. That's really important. This is also useful in differentiation of, like many people can get the math done. Can you get the math done and explain it, and think about some other levers that aren't explicitly part of the case? So in terms of revenue, keeping in mind that we're working for an auto dealer here, new products, are they only selling a few different models, or can we introduce some new products? Perhaps a cheaper one, because electric vehicles until recently were fairly expensive. Could we explore the pricing model and explore pricing increases? Obviously, when there are cost increases, companies often pass those along to the consumer in some cases. Increase the marketing budget would be another one. We also were focused on the variable costs. We didn't talk about fixed costs. So different ways to lower fixed costs. One example might be exploring a channel shift. So again, going back to our notes from the beginning, if you're stuck with your brainstorming, like, what information do you have? Well, they sell 85% through physical dealerships. That's more expensive than selling through an online channel. It requires labor, it requires real estate. And so can we get more people to buy vehicles online, as an example? Really good question on the brainstorming. It is appropriate to ask for time. I would usually say no. I would usually just say, like, let's do it together. The two times that you definitely will get time are at the beginning to do your framework, and at the end to put together your conclusion. A more kind interviewer than I might give you time to brainstorm on your own, but I try to keep it as conversational as I can. All right, so now we've done our brainstorming. Jen, if you want to go forward, conclusion. This is, all parts of the case are important, but bringing it all together was one of the most important parts. And, just naturally, like, whatever you say here is what you leave me with. So the stronger your conclusion is, it really helps bring home the case. So a couple thoughts before I get into specifics. One is like, if you think about the flow of the interview, you start with a framework and then you work through problem solving and then you're going to end with an answer. The more that you can tie those things together and show that you had structured thinking, it's really valuable. So, what is the question we're answering? If we go back to the beginning, you got that question at the beginning. It's what is the driver of profitability and how do we fix that? What you should do is you should write that question on the top of your piece of paper and you should circle it. And that's the question you're always trying to answer. If you are doing something or talking about something or asking something or solving something that is not answering that question, you are wasting your time. Because when it comes down to the conclusion and you have 2 minutes left, you need to have an answer to that question. So, what are the drivers of poor profitability? Well, we have a pretty good answer now. We're probably sourcing from the wrong place. Jen, if you want to go to the next page, we are probably sourcing from the wrong place in terms of most cost-effective location because we were looking at raw materials costs alone instead of also including logistics costs. We had a dip in sales in 2020, probably due to COVID or supply chain issues. And then the price increased significantly from 2019 to 2020, but stagnated, potentially due to delays in product launches or people buying cheaper vehicles due to less discretionary income. So these are the drivers of profitability. That's the answer to the first part of our question. If we go forward, then Jen. The second part of the question is what are the steps that EV Dealer Co. could take to get back on track? And so again, we've answered this question. We can source from Australia or Brazil instead of China. We can explore trying to channel shift. We can explore new pricing models, new products, all of those things. So this is the last couple slides is not like how you would approach an actual case. This is more just to show like we have solved all of this. Now, conclusion, it's very important to be really succinct. So what you want to do in your conclusion is you basically want to say, this is the problem we're solving. This is what we did. This is the answer. This is why. It's like, shouldn't be more than 30 seconds of you talking. So we came in to address the profitability for EV Dealer Co. We examined their financial structure and identified a significant increase in logistics costs. And when we explored the opportunity to change the location that we were sourcing from, we realized that Australia and Brazil would be cheaper than China, even though the raw materials cost more. So EV Dealer Co. should look to move their supply chain to either Brazil or Australia or some combination of those, which will save them X dollars. I don't remember exactly what it was per year. And then you would say, I can't remember. Keep going, Jen. Is that it? Okay. And then you would say, do you want me to go into any risks and next steps? And it depends on if the interviewer's got time, if it's running over, if the interviewer wants to do some quick behavioral. They may or may not say yes, but definitely ask. It is a differentiator in terms of the case. So make sure that you have the risks and next steps ready to go with your conclusion. The last thing I'll say, and then I'm going to take a breath because I've been talking for like 30 minutes straight now, is there's not one way to solve a case. Generally, there is a set of right financial calculations or quantitative calculations. The rest of it is up to you. There's no right framework. There's not one way to like answer the question through your conclusion. We want to see creativity. We want to see structured problem solving. So all that being said, thank you for listening. Hopefully this was helpful, and we have plenty of time now to answer questions. Between Maggie and I, we can talk about case interviews. We can talk about the interview process, and Jen can answer any questions on the overall recruiting process and logistics.
Thanks, Evan. I do want to make sure that I feel like somebody asked if you can ask the interviewer to repeat the question. You absolutely can ask them. And I just want to highlight what Evan said, which is you should restate, okay, so our client is Electric Vehicle Co. Like you should go through all of the questions to make sure that you got the numbers down at the start, because you could do all the right math and end up with the wrong answer, so definitely do. And then I would let the brainstormer take some time just to show that there's a variety of approaches in interviewing.
Yeah, so if you guys had any other questions come up during the case part, or if you're wondering about any of the behavioral parts of the interview, definitely feel free to ask. I do see we have a question that came in. Just for both of our speakers here, you guys can jump in. Are there specific categories for casing that we should focus on for preparation? For example, profitability, market entry, M&A, stuff like that.
I can take this just to give Evan still some moments to catch his breath, and then we can hand off. I don't think that there are particular areas of focus. What I would recommend that you do instead is get a couple of very simple and adaptable frameworks like profitability, maybe like an internal, external, and just work with those pretty well and get good at adapting. One thing that we do at Kearney is we adapt our frameworks like a lot to the case to the client at hand and the situation at hand. But just as a hallmark, every person at Kearney has their own individual case that they give. So there's no like magic thing to know there. It's just sort of a flavor of the month.
All right. I think we could move on to the next question. We'll keep giving you a little break, Evan. How do projects you work on change depending on location? And do certain offices specialize in different industries? Oh my goodness. Excuse me.
You want me to answer that one too? Is that what you said?
Yeah, why not? Why not?
So I'll start with what I think there's a question here that's sort of under the questions you asked, which is about how do we staff? And we staff across the region, including across Canada and across offices, including Mexico City. So it doesn't matter where you are in terms of what project you're on. So offices don't specialize in certain um, in certain industries per se. Although I think the Detroit office is a little tailored to the auto industry, but in general, like that's not intentional, and you can join whatever office you want when you have an offer with Kearney. We're pretty flexible about finding the right people and then making sure that they can be where they want to be.
Yeah, I can second Maggie's office spiel. And this does answer somebody's question that was asked. You won't be interviewing for a specific city. In your application, you just give your preferences. I think your first and second preferences of which office you would like to be based out of, but it does not mean that you are interviewing specifically for, say, the Chicago office or for specifically San Francisco. We have a national staffing model. So wherever you are based, you can be staffed on any North America project. Okay. So there's a question on group interviews. We won't be having group interviews. Your interviews will be direct and one-on-one with one interviewer, and they will be done virtually.
So there's a question on the difficulty of this case. I think this case is generally indicative of case difficulty. There's probably more math in here than you would have, like just literally more calculations than you'd have to do, and more financial data presented. But I think in terms of like the structure of the case and all of that, it's about what you can expect.
So this question kind of touches on travel, which I think both of you guys can really speak to. Are offices more locally staffed, or is it common to be traveling from office to office?
So we don't have an office-based staffing model. So what project you on is not driven necessarily by where you are. Although, if you're working with a team in London on a project, you probably don't want to be in the San Francisco office. We would try to manage that. What I would say too then is, how is traveling approached? And also, this is pretty project dependent and team dependent. I think that there are some clients and some projects where it's every week, like 3 days, or every other week, 3 days travel. There's some other projects where it's really driven by like the team is traveling to co-locate together. So that's often traveling to Kearney offices, and again, sort of at a cadence that meets the needs of the project and the needs of the team. And then there are also projects where there's not very much travel at all. It's very dependent, and you can sort of indicate when you're staffed. Do you have any restrictions to travel? Are you really interested in traveling? And that's something that the team can work around and take into account in terms of, are you the right fit for the project? Evan, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
I am sorry, I'm multitasking, answering questions in the chat, but
No, that's
from
okay.
what I heard, I
I
think,
answered it, so it's fine.
yeah, you're spot on, I think. There's a couple questions, I think, that are worth answering live. So one is, what is the summer internship like? Do you travel, and do you stick to one project? So the internship is 10 weeks. Your first week is you're in training the whole time, and then you have 9 weeks of project work. Yes, we try to staff you on one project. Sometimes, by the nature of our projects, they're shorter. So you might be on a diligence that's like 3 or 4 weeks, and then we'll find something else for you to work on for the rest of the summer. It's ideal if you can work with the same team, but it is a true consulting experience. You're treated as an analyst for 10 weeks, and so you are staffed as such. And most interns do travel, not all, but like the majority of our projects travel, and interns are part of those projects. And then the one that I saw right before was, how can you stand out during the case? I think I gave a bunch of tips for standing out during the case, but I think a few things. One, be engaged and conversational throughout. Two, having really structured problem solving, like I said, working from the prompts to your framework to all the calculations and brainstorming you do to your conclusion, and being really crisp on that. And then the last thing I'd say, and Maggie, I'd love for you to add on, would be, you know, just bring the confidence, and then ask questions, and make sure that you get through the case, and don't freeze and pause, and what I said basically, like don't let yourself spin into not being able to solve the case.
I really agree with a lot of the points that Evan highlighted when he was demonstrating his case. Some things that really work for me is just like being very hypothesis driven within that structure. So, you get the prompt and you're like, okay, it's a profitability case. I know that profits break down into revenue and costs. Like, this is a vehicle in 2021. Like, I know that there were supply chain issues. So my hypothesis is that it is a cost issue, not a revenue issue. So that's where I want to start first. And you don't have to be right, and you don't even have to know. Just, where are you going to go first, and why? What's your gut telling you? And we'll sort of give you that. We'll give you a guide usually. We won't let you go too far astray. This also goes back to somebody's question about, are you going to get the information, or do you have to ask for it? Like, I like to make people ask for it pretty clearly. They're like, what can I have the financial information? And I like to be like, well, what information do you want to have, and why do you want to have it? And again, like bringing a reason, I want to look at revenues and I want to look at costs, because I want to see, our revenues down, our costs up, because that's what's driving profitability. I think the final thing that Evan highlighted in his is, when you get a number, tie it back to the overall question. There was that point in the case where he lands and it's like, wow, it's way more expensive to source in China than it is in Australia or Brazil. Was that the third one? That's probably driving our cost structure. Like, take it back to the question and say, like, I've had an insight. I was looking for drivers. Here's one, circle it, make a note of it and constantly go back to what is the question we're answering and how am I using my framework to answer that question, and then react as you get it. I think that all of those things just show that you are driving with purpose. And that really stands out to me.
I think, could you guys both talk to managing nerves, how, if you're getting really nervous or overwhelmed in an interview, like how to take the step back and maybe ask for a breath or two? Like, how do you guys advise on that if somebody's getting really overwhelmed in the moment? And also, this webinar is going to be recorded. It is being recorded right now. It will be uploaded to our website and it will be shared with you all via email for you guys to access. So you guys will have access to this recording to watch back over.
Did you say, Jen, there was a question you were going to ask us?
Yeah, I was asking, how you guys advise interviewees on how to take a step back and maybe if they're getting super overwhelmed during the
Managing
interview or
nerves.
nervous, like how to manage those nerves or maybe how to take a step back as you're in the interview, just trying to stay calm and succinct and confident.
I mean, I think it's a little hard. It's a pretty high pressure situation. It can be. I think trying to form a connection with the interviewer off the bat with like a quick, asking about them and sharing a little about you can sort of diffuse some of the tension. The other thing I think is that practice casing, and if you do it, you don't need to do it forever, but if you've done it enough that you've gotten some pretty good like muscle memory for it, I think it's easier to feel a little relaxed.
Evan, any tips?
I think it's not easy. Like objectively, it's stressful, and I think the biggest things that worked for me were what I said at the beginning. Like the more reps you have, the more confident you are in your approach, and you really it's hard to do. I'm not trying to like minimize the difficulty of this, but like you really have to just treat it as like Evan and I are solving this case together. If I'm giving an interview, like that's the only way that you're gonna be able to get through cases. I have all the information you need. So rather than viewing it as like interview or an interviewee, view it as we're solving a problem together.
Great. I think those are really helpful tips. Just to give you guys a reminder of the recruiting timeline, you should be hearing back on whether or not you will be invited to interview tomorrow. If you do hear back and you are invited to interview with us, first rounds will be the week of October 9th. And then final rounds will be on October 20th. So there are multiple days for our first round interviews, but there's only one day for our final round interview. I will say our recruiting team is super flexible about interview days. So if you need to reschedule, our team is very understanding that, life happens. So we really, really ask for you to stick to those days. But if anything arises, we are happy to help you reschedule.
I see another question about offices. And again, one of the things that I really liked at Kearney is there's a lot of flexibility about where I am. So I'm understanding is this is the US internship. So all offices in the US are open for you. You can, I believe, select where you intern. And then after you get an offer, you can then change where you are. Like you could get an offer to be in New York and then actually you want to move out to San Francisco and go. And because we don't staff based on office, we're really open about wherever you want to live. And even, I know folks who live in DC but are actually part of the New York office, or live in Maine and are part of the New York office. So there's some flexibility about where you live. I think I think new joiners need to live close to offices. The person admin is a partner, but there's some flexibility about where we are. And again, we want to make it work for you once we've found the right people. We really it's not about playing games. It's about what fits your needs.
Yeah, so the living outside of the office that you were based in, that kind of comes with tenure at the firm. When you guys come back full time, you are asked to live locally to your office within commuting distance. It's just to help build your network and really make sure you guys are successful in your first year at the firm. I also saw some questions about sponsorship. So the firm as a whole, US and globally, we don't sponsor at the BA level. So we don't sponsor for our summer business analyst intern positions as well. So that also includes like STEM OPT visas. So you will need to have US work authorization to also qualify for this internship.
Evan, how did you enjoy your case interviews? What did you like best about them?
I was just looking at that question. I'm a math nerd, so I generally really enjoyed the math. I think now I appreciate the value of frameworks, having been a consultant for a few years. But that's like definitely hindsight bias. So I would say like at the time it was the math, and then it was like getting done and ending and having the stress relief of getting through it. How about you?
I my Kearney interviews were the most collaborative interviews that I had. And some, we're asking about how to like not be stressful. Like my interviewer was like so nice. The case was super interesting. It was about like the company Drizzly, which was a company that like consultants at Kearney came up with. I just felt really collaborative, and it felt like team-based problem solving, which is what our work is and is why I like our work. But also finishing, also having it be over was the other best part.
Yeah, I would just echo. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about why Kearney on this webinar, but my whole interview process was extremely collaborative, and the people that I interviewed with were checking in with me and uh, really made me feel valued throughout. And it felt like the firm was trying to get to know me and give me some insight into the firm, not just like can you get through a case. So I would 100% echo that.
Yeah, I mean, there were some other firms where I felt like they just like listed off the math, and I just like kind of solved the math, and they were like, okay, great, thanks. And it was so different. It was just like, how do you think and what would you do? Like I was thinking, even in the case that you gave, like I feel like in my like I would want to have a conversation about like Brazil or Australia. Like what are the pros and cons here? And like they're the same cost. What other things should we think about,
We
Somebody go
Sorry,
ahead.
we just got a question about where you can get example problems to prepare for case interviews. So I know there are a lot of like online resources that you could look up. I think it's called Casetify. I'm not too familiar with it, but we also, Kearney, released an interactive case online this year to help you guys prep and practice cases as well. So that's also a really big resource you guys can use. We do have our recordings from last year's webinar still up, and last year we had a much more in-depth kind of step-by-step approach to the case interviews. So that webinar is still up from last year that you can reference as well.
Yeah, there
Yeah.
are online resources like Rocket Blocks is a good resource. There are some books like Case Interview Secrets and Case in Point. Those are both very good. If you are enrolled in school and your school has like a management consulting association club, those clubs often have a lot of resources. I don't know, if there are any use that I missed.
Yeah, all the if you want to practice math, there's a lot of good sites to do that. And then the books that Maggie mentioned are good. And if you do go to a smaller school and don't have access to like the consulting club infrastructure, you can literally just go online and type in any big business school name casebook, and they'll come up. So like I remember I went to Michigan, so I had somebody like there was a Darden casebook that I used, and there was an HBS casebook that I used, and they're out there. They're PDFs. You just download them. So
Yeah, it'll be a good test of your resourcefulness in doing internet search, which is also a consultant skill that we're not testing for precisely here, but can you find it on Google?
I think we've answered all the questions that were in the chat, but if we didn't, then post yours again because it probably got lost if it hasn't been answered.
Yeah, we still
That
have a
is the
couple
benefit of
minutes
Slido,
left.
is it's easier to track. But I think
Yeah. Last call, we got 2.5 more minutes.
awesome.
Well, if there aren't any more questions, we do have an undergrad inbox that you guys are more than welcome to send your questions to. You guys have questions later. Morgan is going to put that in the chat for you so you can take note of that. And we did record this webinar, which we will be sharing the link once it's ready with you guys. So thank you guys so much for joining tonight. We can wrap up here, and thank you to both Evan and Maggie for joining tonight and really taking the time to talk about, our interview process.
Thanks for coming, guys. Good luck. It's a stressful process, but you've got it.
We believe in you guys. Well, have a good night, everybody, and thank you again so much for joining.
Bye-bye.
Good luck, everyone.